Hi, everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is June the 15th, 2023. I'm Barry Stagner, and here in studio with a very special guest. I like to call him the most famous dog in the world. I get requests literally from all over the world. Where's Louie? We want to see Louie. So I thought I'd give you a look at our now 14-month-old baby Huey. And come here, bub. Come here. Come on. This is little Louie, and those of you who've been with us for a while remember he was 4.5 pounds when we got him, and now he's much more than that, but he's still our big baby. But anyway, just for all the Louie fans out there, and you cat people are going to have to put up with us. Here he is. Here's the big boy, and I guess he's just going to settle in and relax. But anyway, we're just so thankful for him, and he's been such a great blessing to our home. And as you can see, he's growing and growing. Apparently, we're going to do the show like this. But anyway, here's your Louie look for the month. People at church always asking, when are you going to bring Louie on? And then, of course, I get emails too. So here he is. Here's the big boy. And now let's get on with the program. Go ahead, bub. And one other little piece of news that I thought I'd pass along before we get into all of our stories, which are, again, this week, both interesting and bizarre, some of the things going on in our world. But I've got a new book coming out, and it'll be out in January of next year. And just wanted to show you a copy of the cover. And it is a play on words. It's one of my favorite things. Those who go to the church know how much I like titles. And it's not the sign of the times, but rather the time of the signs, a chronology of Earth's final events. And as I said, it'll release January 6th of 2024. And it basically, as I see it, it takes you through the last days scenario, beginning with the rebirth of the nation of Israel, why that's a prophetic necessity, and the other things that will follow in sequence and how I believe they're going to happen all the way up to our eternity with the Lord. So be praying for that, and so thankful for Harvest House, and they're publishing the book, and looking forward to the impact, hopefully, that it will have on letting people know what's coming and how to prepare and to make sure that you are ready. So with that said, let's jump into our stories. Before we get into it, just a reminder, Jesus told us in Matthew 24:3-8, as well as in Luke chapter 21, that there'd be some things that would go through their normal progression in life, and then all of a sudden they'd exponentially increase, like birth pangs. And it includes wars and rumors of wars. And one of the things that is often asked is, where's the United States in Bible prophecy? Is there the U.S. Somewhere, the world's greatest superpower, the most generous nation in the history of the world? Even though we account for some 2.5% of the world's population, we have long been the most powerful country in the world. And God has blessed us, I believe, because of our Declaration of Independence and our public announcement to the world that our dependence is upon Him. And we have been endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights, amongst which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in our very opening declaration. But it is clear that the United States is not in Bible prophecy. And a lot of other countries aren't either. But why are we not there? And some have posed that, and my hope would be the same, that it's the rapture of the church that cleans this country out from sea to shining sea, and that we basically no longer are able to function nationally because so many people have been saved and removed from the surface of the earth in a moment and a twinkling of an eye. But the other possibility is that we either implode as the Roman Empire did, and it's interesting the parallels and what's being practiced here in the United States and what's recorded in Edward Gibbon's book, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, where the elements that contributed to the Roman Empire's implosion were basically free food for the masses and circuses and entertainment, and sports becoming more and more violent, the breakdown of the family in the Roman Empire, and the disrespect for religion. And all those things are happening here in the United States, and they're increasing and becoming more and more intense in these last days as labor pain type progression would be expected. And is it possible that the United States experiences a war and that nuclear exchange? Well, I'm sure that's on the table as a good possibility in the minds of many. But our first couple of stories are kind of along that line, and we've got some significant war and rumor of wars information happening all around us every day, including that from The Independent, which announced today that Belarus has received nuclear bombs 3 times the size of the Hiroshima bomb from Russia. And Belarus has started taking delivery of Russian tactical nuclear weapons. President Alexander Lukashenko announced, claiming that some of these were 3 times more powerful than the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Mr. Lukashenko said that the bombs are 3 times more powerful because he didn't ask Mr. Putin for weapons. He demanded them and that they be powerful. And Vladimir Putin was speaking to the Putin ally was speaking to the Russian state TV channel Rossiya 1 on a road in a forest clearing with military vehicles and a storage facility visible in the background seen around him. This will be the first such warhead deployment by Moscow, comprising shorter range, less powerful nuclear weapons that could potentially be used on the battlefield outside of Russia since the fall of the Soviet Union. The interview was posted on the Belarusian Belta state news agency's Telegram channel on Wednesday and comes 5 days after the Russian president announced plans to start deploying tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, even as Moscow will retain their control after the special storage facilities to park them in are ready. Now, Mr. Lukashenko further alleged that Belarus has always been a target for the West. They, the West, have wanted to tear us to pieces since 2020. No one has so far fought against a nuclear country, a country that has nuclear weapons, Mr. Lukashenko said, adding that the nuclear deployment will act as a deterrent against potential aggressors. And Belarus has been an active participant in Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, as it has consistently allowed its territory to be used by Russian forces to attack Kiev. Now, we also see that Just the News reports that I skipped an article here. I don't know where the headline, here it is. Politico reports that the U.S. deploys F-22 fighters to the Middle East in response to unsafe Russian aircraft activity. Now, the stealth jets deployed from Langley Air Force Base in Virginia will join the existing American and allied air and ground forces in the area, according to a news release from CENTCOM, which also covers portions of South and Central Asia. The Air Force has deployed the F-22 fighter jets to the Middle East because of unsafe Russian aircraft activity, Central Command announced on Wednesday. And Russian forces and their unsafe and unprofessional behavior is not what we expect from a professional Air Force. Army General Michael Eric Kurula, the head of CENTCOM, said in the release, the regular violation of agreed-upon airspace deconfliction measures increases the risk of escalation or miscalculation. As the war in Ukraine continues, relations between the U.S. and Russia have remained tense. American military officials have reported increasingly reckless Russian activity in the Mideast region for several months. Now, the reason I think these 2 articles are important to open with is because of that one particular word, miscalculation, and their regular violation of agreed upon airspace restrictions could allow for a miscalculation, is what the American Army general said. Now, this brings to mind also what we've often presented in the past regarding the Isaiah 17:1 prophecy, in that Damascus will cease from being a city. And we know that the Israeli military, the IAF, the Israeli Air Force, has run sorties into Syria, specifically toward Damascus, to basically eliminate weapons deliveries from Iran to their proxy military forces there and their own military forces. They're 40 miles from the northern border with the Israeli Golan. But here's the thing. I think because we know that there have been chemical weapons stored in and around the Damascus airport, and supposed research facilities have been the target that is mentioned in the past, it is possible that what causes Damascus to cease from being from being a city could be a nuclear device that has been snuck into the country that Israel destroys. It could be that they hit a storage facility for chemical weapons and the place becomes uninhabitable again, or not again, but permanently. And all of these are possibilities. But one of the things I think to keep in mind as we looked at these pair of opening stories is that this miscalculation could lead to an escalation that causes an eruption of World War III type events. And all it takes, here you've got these fighters, you've got American fighters, and the article went on to say that the armed Russian jets flew over U.S. military outposts in Syria nearly every day in March, according to an Army commander. In April, Russian pilots were seemingly inviting American jets to dogfight in Syria, a lieutenant general told the military publication Defense One. So, here you've got these high energy individuals who are skilled at their craft, who are love and defend their country, and they're kind of adrenaline junkies and filled with testosterone, and all it takes is just one guy to lose his cool and push the fire button on his missiles or rockets, and the next thing you know, we've got a full-scale military event happening. And the reason I think we also need to allow this at least into our thinking as a possibility is because we've seen how quickly things can change. I mean, back in September of 2001, on September 11th, we saw the whole world change and just dramatically quickly, and that could happen again. And even watching how the moral climate in the world has changed, and facts have changed definition in these last days. And so too, we could wake up one morning and something has happened on the other side of the world, and the next thing you know, people are firing nuclear weapons at one another. And, this wars and rumors of wars includes wars. It's not just rumors of wars. And again, we have to remember that when Jesus said these are the beginning of sorrows, that phrase beginning of sorrows could also be translated as commencement of birth pangs. So that would imply that there's going to be an increase in frequency and intensity of these events the closer we get to the removal of the church and the tribulation that follows. And by the way, I think we always need to keep in mind that the great escape precedes the great tribulation, and the Lord's going to come and get us. And the dead in Christ will rise first, and we who are alive and remain will meet them in the air. And then things are going to get beyond nasty here on the earth as God pours out his wrath. And finally, in Revelation 16, his undiluted wrath on the earth. He holds nothing back. And that's why Jesus said that, unless he came back and stopped it, no flesh would survive. But here we are looking at the precursors and potential exchanges that could lead to an escalation in events just at any moment. And the fact that, these kind of saber rattling things are going on and the rhetoric that accompanies them, now we've got the Russian Air Force, their Russian pilots, inviting American pilots into a dogfight, potential dogfight. And, some of this has to do with the current administration here in the U.S. being viewed by the international community as extremely weak and unwilling. I mean, our pullout from Afghanistan was just heinous. And, the whole world watched that fiasco take place and, says something about our country in the mind of the world. And, especially those in Middle Eastern countries, the passivity is viewed as a major weakness, and, what they understand is strength. And it seems like many in places of power today don't seem to get it, that, there's a reason that we had 4 years of peace under the previous administration, because they knew they were dealing with somebody who was willing to go at it, so to speak. Now, we've got another story, and a pair of them actually, that are of interest as well, and it addresses a question that's often asked, and that's regarding China. I get questions emailed to me all the time. Amir and I get those questions asked in Q&A sessions. What about China? What role do they play? And again, we have to remember that, the central nation in the 70th week of Daniel is Israel. This time was determined, the 70th week of Daniel was determined. That word in Daniel 9, determined, can be translated as carved out or set aside. The 70th week of Daniel is about Israel and specifically Jerusalem and Daniel's people, which are the Jews. So all of the last day scenarios regarding the international community is their relationship or lack thereof with the nation of Israel. And that's what we see in the Ezekiel war scenario, that these nations are going to invade Israel, and the protesting nations are going to say, why are you invading Israel? So Israel's the central figure. Now, China, what role they play is certainly as a contributor, very possibly to the demise of the United States. We know they're trying to move the world away, along with Russia, from petrodollars and move them into their own individual currencies. This brings a lot of having to change your money into U.S. dollars in order to buy petroleum products, brings a lot of money into the United States. And it would be a major blow for that to cease and for countries to begin to be able to pay for oil from the oil producing nations in their own currency would be a blow to the U.S. economy. And we've already had enough of those already. But Just the News reports China is likely sending military personnel into the U.S., according to the Homeland Security Chairman. House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Mark Green, a Republican from Tennessee, on Wednesday said China is likely sending military personnel into the United States across the border. At a press conference announcing an investigation into Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, Green said there are Chinese nationals, many of whom are military-aged men with ties to the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP, who have crossed the southern border and been released into the United States. We have no idea who these people are, and it's very likely, using Russia's template of sending military personnel into Ukraine, China is doing the same in the United States, Green also said. The revelation came from a Border Patrol sector chief, Green said, adding that he expects a classified briefing on the matter in the near future. The House Homeland Security Committee on Wednesday released a preliminary report on the border stating that the apprehensions of Chinese nationals at the border have skyrocketed. Overall, at the southern border, nearly 10,000 Chinese migrants were encountered at the border from October of 2022 through April of 2023. Just 7 months, there's been 10,000 Chinese migrants encountered at the border. The previous year, during the last fiscal year, which ran from October 2021 through September of 2022, less than 2,200 Chinese migrants were encountered at the border in an entire year. Now we've got 10,000 in half a year, just over that. Now, the new Tang Dynasty, and by the way, someone had asked me online, what is that? It's a media outlet for those who have escaped China and have lived under communism, and they are very bold and outspoken against the Chinese regime and why we need to avoid any type of mimicry of that in our political system and avoid socialism and communism altogether. And these people are very passionate in their reporting, and they report that China is all over the Caribbean, retired Colonel John Mills says. The Biden administration has been flip-flopping on whether or not it's aware of the existence of a Chinese spy station in Cuba. And last Thursday, Pentagon spokesman Brigadier General Pat Ryder denied claims of its existence, as reported by the Wall Street Journal. But this week, National Security Council spokesman John Kirby confirmed the Biden administration was aware of the spy hub. The new Tang Dynasty spoke with Colonel John Mills, Homeland Security expert and member of the National Security Council, who said China has been in Cuba for a very long time. Now, I think China, because we owe them so much money and we've outsourced so many jobs and manufacturing jobs specifically to China, I think if China is going to play a role in the demise of the United States, it would be economically, not necessarily militarily, even though that's a possibility. I think Russia would be more of a threat on the war front, and China more on the economic front. And, for them to cut us off, or for us to, we borrow a lot of money from China. And oddly enough, one of the most ridiculous things that I think the recent administrations, I don't want to limit it to just one, but it's been going on for some time. As a personal practice, if you're borrowing money to give away, you're nuts. And this has been the practice of the U.S. We borrow money to give to other people. And, if you don't have it, you can't give it. But that's not the way we operate now. And that's why we have trillions and trillions of dollars of debt. The money will never get repaid for. So, it could be that if we default on the money that we owe to China, they shut us off and shut off all the goods that flow into the country. And, who knows what can happen, the economic unraveling. And we know it's coming in the tribulation period. There's going to be a huge financial crisis during the tribulation period. I hope nothing like that happens beforehand. But again, we don't know for sure all the components and the players necessarily in all the scenarios, but China's clearly having an influence in these days. What they'll do during the tribulation, if there is a China during the tribulation, we just don't know. We have to remember that the geopolitical landscape is going to change completely under the Antichrist and his cronies that rule alongside of him. He may change the name of every country. There may be just the world. And he has overseers of the 7 continents on the planet. Because we do know first there's 10 in number that serve with him or under him, and then he eliminates 3, leaving 7. So possible there's just one person in charge of each continent around the world under his overall covering. But we won't be here to find out. What we'll see from heaven, I don't know. People often ask that question too. Do people in heaven know what's going on the earth? I kind of doubt it. And the reason I say that is because heaven is an incredible place. And why would we be concerned if we're there with what's going on down here? But anybody's guess. Axios reports, and switching over to the Middle East and Israel specifically, blatantly violating international law, Israel plans West Bank settlement expansion. Now, human rights defenders on Monday blasted Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right apartheid government after it reportedly informed the Biden administration of plans to build thousands of new Jewish-only settler homes in the illegally occupied West Bank of Palestine. Now, this first paragraph is enough to make our blood boil. It certainly does mine. Israel is not an apartheid government. It is the only democracy in all of the Middle East. It's the only country in the Middle East where you can freely practice a religion of your choice. If you're a Muslim, you can be a Muslim. If you're a Christian, you can be a Christian. And if you are a Jew, you can practice Judaism. If you are an atheist, you can be an atheist. If you're secular, you can be secular. And this is the exclusive country in which those things are true in all of the Middle East. And on top of that, the West Bank is not the West Bank. The West Bank is Judea and Samaria, a region of the world that God has given as an unconditional, everlasting covenant to his people who had descended from Abraham, Isaac, through Jacob, who was renamed Israel, by the way. It is not Palestine. It is the land of Israel. And the last international document states the land is given to the Jews, says nothing about the Palestinians. And there was certainly, when the Ottoman Empire broke up in the 1920s, 1918, the Balfour Declaration came and the Ottoman Empire broke up. And then a couple decades later, the Middle East was divided up into 10 territories. And there was a region given to Arab Christians, that's known as Lebanon. There was a region given to Arab Muslims, and a few of those, obviously, Iraq in particular. And, all of these things are the last legal documents that the international community has stated concerning this particular area. And in 1948, on May the 14th, on our calendar here in the West, May 15th in Israel, there was land that was set aside for the nation of Israel. Now, the British government took a vast majority of that land back and called it Jordan. But all the land in which the Israelis now live is, by international law, their land. So what this article is talking about is simply untrue. But it says, for 2 decades, Israeli and international human rights experts have called the settlements, which are illegal under Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention and the International Criminal Court's Rome Statute, part of Israel's apartheid regime. The seizure of Palestinian land, first of all, there's no Palestine, so there can be no Palestinian land in the occupied territories, is also a war crime under the Rome Statute. The American government can and should materially pressure Israel to stop impeding on Palestinian human rights. And it's the Palestinians that are launching rockets to the tune in May of over 1,000 rockets into Israel unprovoked, and sending the incendiary balloons into Israel, starting massive forest fires, destroying crops and fields, all these other things. And yet, of course, the international community condemns Israel. Out of the UN resolutions against Israel last year, there were 15 against Israel, 5 against the rest of the world. It's just crazy how this world thinks. And the truth of the matter is, that's because they're God's chosen people, and that's the national homeland God gave to his chosen people. So if it's being opposed, you know who's behind it. It's the adversary, the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. And you know how that whole scenario goes. So all of these statements, again, condemning the nation of Israel and the call for the U.S. to materially pressure Israel to stop impeding on Palestinian human rights, reminds us of Genesis 12:3, where the Lord said to Abram, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And of course, when he adds, and through you, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. So that gives it a forward push, so to speak, all the way up to the Messiah and his coming, and then his rule, because nations of the earth are still being blessed today through the one who was born through the Jews, that being Yeshua, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And because that portion of Genesis 12:3 is still true and in play today, so is the first part. He'll bless those who bless Israel, and he'll curse those who curse Israel. So we need to be very careful. Even when Zechariah chapter 12 talks about that those who would divide the city, God will cut them into pieces. All who would heave it away. And that doesn't go strictly for Jerusalem. That goes for the land of Israel. Israel is not to be divided. As a matter of fact, the book of Amos in chapter 9 talks about the fact that when the Jews are back in the land, they will not be uprooted again. So if we're going to side with anybody in this matter, it ought to be with the Lord and his word, and therefore we ought to be in support of the nation of Israel. But again, this rise in anti-Semitism and just this Axios article that is just highly inaccurate and extremely offensive and condemning of Israel calls for the U.S. to take a stronger position against the nation that God has promised to bless those who bless them. Now, the Jewish News Syndicate is reporting that the U.S. and Iran are close to reaching informal unwritten agreement. Washington and Tehran are close to reaching an informal agreement on the Tehran regime's nuclear program, the New York Times reported yesterday. 3 senior Israeli officials and an Iranian official and a U.S. official confirmed to the paper that the broad outlines of the indirect negotiations, some of which took place in the Gulf state of Oman last month. According to the report, some Iranian officials are calling the unwritten deal a political ceasefire. The agreement, which 2 Israeli officials called imminent, would limit Iran's uranium enrichment to its current production level of 60%. Iran would also put a stop to attacks against American contractors in Syria and Iraq by the regime's terrorist proxies. Additionally, Iran would increase its cooperation with international nuclear inspectors and halt ballistic missile sales to Russia. In exchange, the United States would agree not to ratchet up economic sanctions, to stop confiscating Iranian oil, as occurred in April, and not to seek punitive resolutions against Iran at the United Nations or at the International Atomic Energy Agency. Well, it's interesting because what the U.S. administration seems to forget is that, and I meant to look it up before I've started the program, but I failed to. I believe it's called TAYYP, TAYYIP, and that is that the Muslims are allowed to lie if it advances the cause of Islam or protects the Muslims. And therefore, this unofficial, unwritten agreement is worth exactly what the previous agreements were, including the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action from 2015, which they broke. And remember, 3.9% uranium enrichment is the level necessary for energy production. And 60% is unnecessary completely, and it's a lot closer to weapons grade than it is to energy grade. But the truth is, 60% is a heavy enough concentration for some type of dirty device, a dirty bomb or a suitcase bomb or something like that. It's enough to contaminate, even though it wouldn't cause the massive catastrophic damage that it would if it were, fully enriched and on a nuclear warhead. But again, there's this blind eye, and that reminds us that we are in a spiritual battle, and Israel is about to go into this time period that is going to cause 2/3 of them to die during the tribulation, as Zechariah says, but 1/3 are going to look upon the one whom they pierced and mourn for him. And thus, as Paul wrote in Romans chapter 11, all Israel is going to be saved when Jesus comes back and they see him touch down on the Mount of Olives, and this 35-mile wide valley opens up and living waters flow to the Mediterranean, in which everything is dead, like the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea is going to receive the same living water, and both are going to come back to life. And this is what God is promised, and this is what is going to happen. And the devil is trying to oppose it. This is a spiritual battle that is going on without question. And we happen to be living in a time where we are greatly privileged to watch this all happen. And, remembering what Paul said in 2 Timothy 1:7, that God has not given us the spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind. And, we can have a sound mind during a time where the world has lost theirs, because we know where all this is going. We know that when things get really ugly, when God's wrath is poured out, we're not going to be here. He's going to keep us from the hour of testing that is coming upon the whole world to try men's souls. That's a promise to the church. We won't be here for any of it. But we are seeing the precursors to it. And this march toward it began back when Israel became a nation once again. Now, we know, and there's been a lot of talk about artificial intelligence, and we know that seems to play a role pretty clearly in the Revelation 13 scenario, where there's an image that's made and people worship this image, and it has life breathed into it. In other words, it is lifelike. And listen to this. CBN is reporting, the Christian Broadcast Network, that AI chatbot preaches at a church in Germany. And the subheading to the article is, looks like the unveiling of the Antichrist beast system. A unique sermon, the article says, was delivered via artificial intelligence Friday in a Lutheran church in Germany. A GPT chatbot asked the people in the fully packed St. Paul's Church in the town of Fürth to rise from the pews and praise the Lord. The bot was personified by an avatar of a bearded black man on a huge screen above the altar. It preached to more than 300 people who showed up for the experimental Lutheran church service, generated almost entirely by artificial intelligence. Dear friends, it is an honor for me to stand here and preach to you as the first artificial intelligence at this year's Convention of Protestants in Germany, the avatar said with an expressionless face and monotone voice. The 40-minute service was created by ChatGPT and Jonas Zimmerlein, a theologian and philosopher from the University of Vienna, who said 98% of the service came from the machine. The entire service was led by 4 different avatars on the screen, 2 young women, 2 young men. Those in church listened attentively to the AI, as the AI preached about leaving the past behind, focusing on the challenges of the present, overcoming fear of death, and never losing trust in Jesus Christ. At times, the AI generated avatar inadvertently drew laughter when it used platitudes and told the churchgoers with a deadpan expression that in order to keep our faith, we must pray and go to church regularly. Some of the audience members said there was no heart and no soul in the presentation. Well, that's because there was no heart and no soul in the AI. That's kind of a ridiculous statement. Others thought it worked pretty well. I had actually imagined it to be worse, but I was positively surprised how well it worked. Also, the language of the AI worked well, even though it was still a bit bumpy at times, according to Mark Jansen, a 31-year-old Lutheran pastor from Troisdorf, near the western German city of Cologne, as he told this to the Associated Press. What the young pastor missed, however, was any kind of emotion or spirituality. No kidding. I'm sorry, but this just blows my mind. What do you think you were going to get from a robot or chat GPT or an avatar, I should say, which he says is essential when he writes his own sermons. And some also pointed out that an AI-generated avatar cannot interact with believers the real way a pastor can. Simmerline said it is not his intention to replace religious leaders with AI. Rather, he sees the use of AI as a way to help them with their everyday work in their congregations. Well, aren't you supposed to be working with people every day? Isn't that the work? And this impersonal AI in a monotone voice with no expression or emotion is going to help you with that. I'm sorry. This just points to what's going to happen in Revelation 13, where there is going to be an image that is worshipped by the whole world. That's going to seem lifelike, and people are going to believe that it's real. And after all, they're being normalized now into watching on all kinds of devices. It doesn't matter how big the screen is. The screen could be no bigger than this phone or than an iPad or than the computer screen that I'm reading. And, looking at some of the newscasters that come out of Japan, these robots, they look like they are real. And so this is going to be part of the role I think AI plays during the tribulation period. Now, we also know Revelation 13 talks about the fact that there's going to be a means of control of the buying and selling of all humanity. Now, we made the point before, and I think it still stands. Remember the mark of the beast. The word mark is the Greek term kragma, and it means a brand. It means a burnt spot on the surface of the skin, which is how they actually used to mark slaves in ancient times. So quite possible it could be that simple, but it seems likely in light of what we just read and what we talked about with this image that is worship that has life breathed into it, or it seems lifelike, that what's actually going to happen is there's going to be some type of interactive device that's on the hand or the forehead, a biotat or something along those lines, or the popularized not too long ago radio frequency implant device, the grain of rice sized chip planted under the skin. Could be any one of those things, but it's the purpose, I think, that we need to remember that's important and is being developed in our next story. The purpose is to control what people are allowed to do. The New Tang Dynasty reported that Amazon locked a man out of his smart home devices for a week after a false racism accusation. A Maryland man was recently locked out of his Amazon smart home system after a delivery driver reported hearing a racial slur while dropping off a package. In a June 4th blog post on Medium, Brandon Jackson described his week-long ordeal of being locked out of the Amazon account he used to control many of the devices around his home. Jackson described the incident as beginning rather innocuously when he tried to use his Amazon Echo Show, a device that can control a variety of connected smart home tools. Jackson first found himself locked out of the device on May 25th, the day after receiving a delivery. And after calling an Amazon customer service line, a representative informed him that he should have received an email about the lockout. And Jackson said that email provided him with the number to an Amazon executive, and Jackson wondered if he was falling for a scam, because it's not typical for an executive at a large multinational corporation to field customer service calls. When I connected with the executive, he said, they asked if I knew why my account had been locked. And when I answered, I was unsure. Their tone turned somewhat accusatory. I was told that the driver who had delivered my package reported receiving racist remarks from my Ring doorbell. The accusation was improbable. Jackson wrote that most delivery drivers in his area are of the same race as him and his family, and thus the racial slur allegation was highly unlikely. After Jackson investigated further, Amazon revealed the driver reported the racial slur allegation around 6:05 p.m. on May 24th. Jackson accessed the video footage from around his home at the time of the incident and found nobody was home at the time of the delivery. He also determined that the automated doorbell addressed the delivery driver with an automated message, "Excuse me, can I help you?" And the driver, who was seen on camera walking away wearing headphones, must have misinterpreted the message. He promptly shared his video evidence with Amazon, but his account remained locked. Now, here's the point of all this. I was thinking as I first stumbled on this story earlier today that, it used to be really frustrating here in the United States when the free speech people would defend the KKK's right to say the racially motivated, hateful things that they would say. But they would scream, it's protected under the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. And, this was a hard pill to swallow. And, I always felt you're going against the spirit of what the founders intended. I wasn't protecting these hate mongers. But now here we are today where there is artificial intelligence, basically, or a Ring app that talks to a delivery driver, and the delivery driver mishears what is said, and somebody has their ability to operate their home cut off. Well, it's just as easy to cut off your credit cards and all those other things because they all run on the same system, basically. And we are so close to, getting out of here for one, and then all of the other things that are going to happen being right on the heels of it. The four horsemen of the apocalypse riding on to the world scene, all seven seals being opened, followed by all seven trumpets being opened, and then finally the seven bowls of God's undiluted wrath being poured out on this world. And during that whole time, that whole 7 years, that whole 2,560 days, we are going to be, or 2,520 days, sorry, I was doing a math in my head and knew I was wrong. We are going to be in heaven at the marriage supper of the Lamb. And we will be standing before the bema seat of Christ during that time. We won't be here. We have something else to do. Besides the fact that we don't have an appointment with wrath, which ought to remind us that we have to be gone in order for God's wrath to be manifested on this earth. Now, the Gateway Pundit is reporting this is evil. Wisconsin County poised to pass 4-part resolution to become the nation's first sex reassignment sanctuary for trans and non-binary children. The reason they want to do this? So they can be transitioned without parental consent. The article says the mask has completely dropped. Leftists in the government are now openly inviting adults from across America to allow the mutilation of innocent children without parental consent and have them exposed to X-rated material. Fox News reported Monday that a liberal county in Wisconsin is considering a resolution that will declare sanctuary status for so-called transgender and non-binary individuals. Children are also included in the proposal, as Ollie London noted. The explicit purpose is so they can be transitioned without parental consent. Fox News notes Dane County would be the first sex reassignment sanctuary for children in America. And Dane County includes the Wisconsin state capital of Madison, one of the most liberal cities in America. The rationale in this hostile environment, some cities and counties across the country are taking steps to support and protect trans and non-binary individuals. Dane County values its transgender and non-binary residents and vigorously opposes measures that would allow legal violence toward trans people in accessing gender-affirming care or expression. Now, we have to remember that words now constitute violence. And if you say transgenderism is not real, or transgenderism is a sin, or transgenderism is not scientific, you've committed an act of violence in the minds of many today. And that's why it has been so important for the leftists to convince others that we all have to believe the same thing. And if you don't believe the same thing, you're not a loving person, you're a bigot, and therefore hateful, and hate is an act of violence. And the resolution goes on to declare that sex reassignment drugs and procedures are a fundamental right. Now, the article goes on to report that four specific things the resolution says adults will not be able to stop children from doing, including being exposed to pornographic materials, participating in sexualized drag queen shows, potential sterilization from and medical harm from cross-sex hormones, and removing their genitalia and reproductive organs. Make no mistake, this is an open declaration of war on America's children. And conservatives noted how alarming and evil the proposal is. Well, we have a group, interestingly, that is doing something about what is going on in cities across the country, especially in the month of June. And Breitbart reports that a Michigan city bans LGBTQ pride flag and other political flags from city property. The all-Muslim City Council of Hamtramck, Michigan, voted unanimously on Tuesday to approve a resolution that would ban the LGBTQ plus pride flag from being flown on the city's public property. The resolution, proposed by Mayor Pro Tem Mohammed Hassan, also bars any religious, ethnic, racial, political, or sexual orientation group flags from being flown on city property and allows only the American flag to be flown, along with the state and city flag and other national flags and the prisoner of war flag, according to a Detroit media outlet. The resolution passed after 3 hours of public comments and months of intense debate, the Detroit Free Press reported. And Hassan and other members of the council said the LGBTQ plus community and others are welcome in Hamtramck. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. It's a very odd spelling, Hamtramck. Hamtramck is the only way I can come up with it. Never heard of that city, but they need to respect religious freedom. Hassan went on to say. Some proponents of the resolution said the pride flag clashes with their faith. Several speakers from Dearborn, who were leaders in the protests last year against LGBTQ books, spoke at the Hamtramck meeting, saying American soldiers sacrificed for the U.S. flag, not the pride flag. Again, this is the Muslim community saying American soldiers sacrificed for the U.S. flag, not the pride flag. And City Councilman Naeem Chowdhury said the LGBTQ plus people will not be discriminated against in the city, but should also respect the religious liberty of the city's Muslim community. We want to respect the religious rights of our citizens, Chowdhury said. You guys are welcome, but why do you have to have the flag shown on government property to be represented? You're already represented. We already know who you are. By making this about bigotry, it's making it like you want to hate us. City Council, and there's the truth right there. City Council members also commented that the code was not about targeting a specific group, stating, if you let one flag in, you have to let all flags in. Now listen to this. An immigrant from Yemen spoke in favor of the resolution, stating that while the city respects all nations, cultures, and their flags, we only salute the American flag. And here, especially in portions of California, you got to fight to even fly the flag, even though it's protected by what's called the Davis-Sterling Amendment from 2014 in California. You could put any type of religious symbol on your front door or fly a flag on your home, and that's protected by this Davis-Sterling Amendment. And here we have people who are siding within the church, and we'll talk about that in a moment, who are siding with this group, and yet the Muslims are speaking up saying the soldiers died for the American flag, not the pride flag. And it'd be nice if the church stood up and united and stood against these things. And the thing about this whole deal is that love has been redefined. And if you don't agree with somebody, you're intolerant and you don't love them. And this is what leads to our final story for the day, and it comes from Christian Headlines. And progressive Christian author Jen Hatmaker launches online course on raising LGBTQ plus kids. Jen Hatmaker, a progressive Christian author. And by the way, a progressive is someone who believes in advanced liberal views, and they are distinct from what has long been true and moves into a more free and liberal understanding of whatever it is that they are touting themselves to be a part of. And listen, there's no such thing as a progressive Christian. The Bible doesn't change. Jesus doesn't change. There is no new way to understand the Bible. The Bible is the Word of God. Jesus is the Word of God. The Word of God doesn't change because God doesn't change. And those who are wanting to change the meaning of certain things in Scripture into a more progressive view are simply denouncing that all Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for reproof, correction, and instruction in righteousness, that the man and woman of God might be fully equipped. And this well-known person has a course titled Me Course, and it guides participants in answering the essential questions and learnings on how to become more educated in the LGBTQIA plus space and navigate our own feelings and improve our parenting responses, understand our child's journey, and feel less alone in the process. Hatmaker, who shared in 2020 that one of her children came out as gay, explained on her website, one of my greatest sadnesses in life is that I did not go to my own work, do my own work early enough so that my daughter Sydney felt safe and beloved in her journey to discovering herself and who she was beautifully made to be. Well, Ms. Hatmaker needs to read Romans chapter 1. And it is an abomination for a woman to lie with another woman. And that is not how God made her. We were all fearfully and wonderfully made, male and female. We have been made because God desires godly offspring. And it is the reproductive process that caused him to manufacture us the way that he did. One boy, one girl that can create offspring. And again, the fact that so many people today don't want to create any anxiety or stress or rock the boat, so to speak, within society. And because the left and the progressives have made it clear that if you don't agree with whatever they say, the tolerance crowd is not going to tolerate you and is going to do everything they can to destroy you. And what Ms. Hatmaker should have done is told her daughter, I love you, but what you're doing is a sin. And, that's actually the most loving thing to do, not affirm people's sinful decisions. And, the big argument, I think it's so ridiculous. The I was born that way argument unravels pretty quickly when you realize that we're all born that way. And what I mean by that way is we're all born as sinners. The manifestation is irrelevant. We're all born with sin natures. That's why we all need to be born again. And that's why Jesus said, if you want to come after me, you have to deny yourself. And, the old nature nurture argument and all that stuff, let's say it is nature. You still have to deny yourself. The liar has to stop lying. The thief has to quit stealing. The adulterer has to quit cheating on their spouse. The fornicator has to stop having sex outside of marriage. And, the LGBTQ and the alphabet group, as they're often referred to, they're not looking for equality. They're looking for an exemption. They're looking for special treatment for their sin to be recognized as acceptable in the Christian community. And, it doesn't float. And this whole progressive Christian thing is a bunch of nonsense because Christians are not liberal. Christians are liberated. But listen, you can be a conservative and not be a Christian. And I'm not saying that, conservatives are Christians and liberals are not. What I'm saying is that those who are truly born again Christians are going to have respect for the Word of God, even with the hard sayings that are within the Word of God. So again, we're seeing just the complete unraveling of our world today. And that tells us that as we can see the day approaching, we have but a short time. And, I've been teaching a class that a fellow pastor, a friend of mine, his church on Tuesday nights, he asked me to come teach a summer school class on Israel. And I was reminding them that, we are an extremely privileged generation. For thousands of people, or for thousands of years, millions and millions of people, Christians, lived without knowing, what is this Ezekiel 37 thing? What do you mean these dry bones are going to live? There's no Jews in Jerusalem. There's no fruitfulness now in this valley that is nothing but a marsh, and as Mark Twain said, a God-forsaken place. And yet here we are alive today, and Israel's getting old, 75 years this year. And what that means as far as this generation shall not pass away, I don't think I can say or anybody else can say, but Israel's getting older. And we also need to note, and I mentioned this to the class the other night, that the book of Revelation is the most detailed record of what's going to go on the surface of the earth that we will see none of. In all the Bible, there's nothing more detailed than the book of Revelation as it pertains to the 70th week of Daniel. And yet we're not going to be here for any of it. We're not going to be here to see people butcher one another under the rider on the red horse of the four of the apocalypse. We're not going to be here to see a day's pay for a quart of wheat or 3 quarts of barley. We're not going to be here for that. We're not going to be here for the fourth horseman, whose name is death, and Hades follows with him and kills a third of the earth's population. We're not going to be here for that. We're not going to hear people hide in the rocks and the mountains in Revelation chapter 6 and call on them rather, to hide them from him who sits on the throne. We're not going to hear the trumpet blasts. We're not going to be here for the bowl judgments. We're going to be with the Lord. So why would the Lord go into such significant, specific detail about a time period where none of us are going to be here for? That's because he wants to burden our hearts for the lost and perishing. That's because he wants us to know what's coming upon the whole world, and that we would have a desperation for those around us who aren't ready to escape it. And that's why Jesus said in Matthew 24:44, therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when he's not expected. And we live at a time of record unexpectation of the rapture of the church. 6.6% of Christians of the 2.42 billion around the world believe in the rapture. Even within what's called the church, there's a low expectation of Jesus coming. Well, that ought to tell us he's coming soon. And I pray that our hearts are broken for those who are perishing around us, and that we would try again with those people that have refused what we have told them. And we need to start talking about the fact that the tribulation is at the door, because the truth of the matter is, I think some people, when you start talking about a man rising up from a revived Roman Empire, Western Europe, when you start talking about taking a mark in order to buy and sell, when you start talking about 144,000 Jews marked out as evangelists for the world, when you start talking about 2 witnesses that are going to be killed in the streets of Jerusalem and lie dead for 3 days and then rise on the third day visibly, and the whole world is going to watch them. When you start sharing those kind of things, and people maybe didn't receive the message prior to the rapture of the church, when they start seeing what you said come to pass, they're going to get real interested in the rest of what you believe. So let's make sure that we're talking about the Lord and the days in which we live, and care enough about people to tell them the truth, and not simply bow to cultural pressures like this Jen Hatmaker did. And what a terrible injustice she has done for her daughter, to convince her that she can be in blatant, unrepented sin and still call herself a Christian. That's not true for anybody. And, you look at Revelation 21:8, and there's a pretty clear list of those and their human characteristics that are unrepented of, that cause them to be thrown in the lake of fire. And the first one is the coward. Then the unbelieving, abominable, idolaters, sorcerers, all liars, is how the list goes. But listen, Jesus is coming soon. And therefore, we should be excited about that. And we should be excited enough to tell that to other people. And if they don't want to hear it, then tell them what's coming after that. And then they'll be thinking about what you said when that time comes. Well, that's it for today. And thank you for joining us. And I hope you enjoyed a little take a peek at Louis. And I really do. I get emails all the time, social media comments all the time from people all over the world. Say hi to Louis. He is the most famous dog in the world. And we sure enjoy him and love him. But anyway, just for all you who've been asking, you got a peek at him today. So that's it for this program. And should the Lord tarry and be willing, we'll see you next week. Otherwise, what we know for sure is we'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless you.